From deadly samurai to knights in shining armor, these are the most epic 1v1 battles in all of history, starting with number 9. When Charles the Good, the Count of Flanders, was shockingly murdered in 1127, it threw everything he ever knew into chaos. Accusations flew left and right. Violence and warfare erupted in the power vacuum. So the stage was set for one of the most epic instances of single combat in all of history. Given that a man who'd cultivated the nickname Charles the Good was actually very well liked, the powers that be were out for the blood of all conspirators involved in the Count's assassination. On April 11th of that same year, one of the main conspirators had been captured and executed in Ypres. But then, another potential conspirator was accused, Guy of Steenvoorde, a knight with an otherwise glowing reputation. Guy was related by marriage to a conspirator, and this was enough to make others suspicious of him. One of his main accusers was a fellow knight named Iron Herman, and an accusation like that was fighting words. And fight they did. An official duel was set, and the two took to horseback to settle their differences the old-fashioned way. They rode towards one another, and Iron Herman was about to realize what a dangerous man he'd just challenged. Guy's moves were expert, routing Herman and throwing him from the back of his horse. Guy circled on horseback, watching his victim cough and splutter on the ground, the breath knocked from his lungs by the impact. Every time Herman tried to stand, he'd strike the knight's back with his lance to keep him down. But this wasn't over, not even close. Herman took a stray moment to draw his sword and plunge it into the belly of Guy's horse, disemboweling the creature and throwing Guy forward into the dirt. Herman readied his blood-stained sword and waited for Guy to rise up and do the same, for their battle to continue. Steel clashed against steel as the fighting raged, the forces of exhaustion in both men pushing against the raw will to survive. Iron Herman was perhaps shocked at the sheer ferocity of his opponent, but neither combatant had any idea just how dirty this fight would get. Their blades clashed until they no longer had the strength to hold them, and when the swords fell to the ground, it became instead a flurry of punches and kicks. Guy would show his physical dominance here too, knocking Iron Herman to the ground and beginning to beat him senseless. As one chronicler of the times would put it, Iron Herman fell prostrate to the ground, and Guy threw himself on top of him, pounding the knight's mouth and eyes with his iron gauntlets. It wasn't long before Iron Herman was a bloody mess, his skull broken and his skin split and bleeding. Whack, whack, whack. As far as Guy could see, there was no iron in Herman that day. As the knight spluttered blood, Guy let himself exhale, let his guard down for a fraction of a moment, and that was exactly what Iron Herman was counting on. He reached out, stuffing his iron gauntlet beneath the chainmail flap that guarded Guy's groin. He grabbed a fistful of Guy's testicles and squeezed them in a bone-crushing grip before launching Guy through the air. Guy's lower body burst open due to the force. That's right, Iron Herman literally ripped Guy's body open by hurling him by the balls. If this wasn't already a mortal wound, Guy had still failed this trial by combat. He was dragged to the gallows while bleeding profusely from the ruin that had once been his groin, had a rope tied around his throat, and was hanged. There's no doubt this was one of the most downright dirty 1v1 fights in human history. He was no longer hung, and then he was hanged. And that's far from the only time two men with swords and some careless words have led to one of history's most insane fights. Number 8. The insane incident between Guy of Steenvoorde and Iron Herman is far from the only case of brutal one-on-one combat being started over a noble Charles, but this time, it wasn't a count. It was the King of England, Charles I, in 1641. It'd be a stretch to call him England's most beloved king, since the English Civil War that would start the year after would culminate in Charles being executed by Oliver Cromwell and the Puritans, but he was certainly king to an eccentric Renaissance man named Kenelm Digby, and God help you if you disobey his king. Digby was known for many things. He was obsessed with alchemy and magic, doing extensive research into a pseudoscientific concept called the powder of sympathy, which could be poured onto a weapon to cure any wound that the weapon had caused. In addition to being an aspiring wizard, he was also an expert fencer, whose skills saved his life and ended the lives of others several times. If the French nobleman Mont had known all this, he might not have badmouthed King Charles in front of him in the middle of a banquet. Kenelm Digby couldn't tolerate someone insulting his beloved monarch and challenged Mont to a duel to the death with rapiers. The Frenchman, being accomplished in the art of the sword himself, decided to take Digby up on the deal. Skill would be the only factor that determined which man would see tomorrow. When their fencing duel began, their skills seemed evenly matched. They tested each other's abilities, neither expending their full strength at first, thrusting and parrying, ducking and dodging, gaining and losing ground. But as the bout went on, the fighting picked up in intensity, with Mont realizing just how seriously Digby had taken the insult against Charles. Perhaps he would have taken it back if he had the chance amid the flurry of dancing swords, but by this point, it was already too late to back out. In the fourth bout of the fight, Kenelm Digby noticed an opening and lunged in, piercing Larosa's chest from below and forcing the blade upwards until it pierced out through the Frenchman's throat. He pulled it free, and Mont fell to the ground, dead. Digby would be jailed by the House of Commons for killing Mont in cold blood, but he would be released, and his swordsmanship would save his life sometime later in a street fight in Spain. Some people really just kind of attract this sort of thing. But sometimes a duel isn't a spur-of-the-moment thing. Perhaps it's a centuries-old cultural tradition with extremely brutal results. It's often been said that we'd live in a world with less war if the men who declared them had to fight in them. But there's one ancient Russian custom that sheds a little doubt on this: the bash na bash, meaning one-on-one, a mechanism for stopping tribal disputes from spilling over into mass bloodshed. In a bash na bash, rather than the forces of two rival druzhnas entering an all-out war, the leaders would meet in single combat under agreed-upon terms to work out the dispute, in a battle to the death. There was no more famous bash na bash than the one that unfolded between Prince Mstislav, the Brave of Chernigov, and Prince Rededya of Kassogia. Their tribes had long been in a kind of extended back-and-forth war that had left so many dead over the years. Things came to a head in 1022, when the forces met by pure chance during a campaign in the territory of the Alans. There, Mstislav and Rededya were able to talk. Perhaps they could end the horrors between their people in an honorable bash na bash, which would leave only one of them dead and let generations of their people go on. The deal was made, but Prince Rededya, a mountain of a man, made only one condition: let the duel be without weapons. They'd decide this in the way of their ancestors, with bone breaking under fist. This would put Mstislav at a disadvantage, because Rededya was not only huge, but was known for his borderline superhuman strength. Still, Mstislav agreed, and the two men took off their shirts. Mstislav made a quiet prayer to the Virgin Mary, and the fight began. They engaged in one of the most violent one-on-one battles the vast plains of the Rus had ever seen, with their two assembled armies as witnesses. It was mythic. Mstislav, despite his smaller stature, fought viciously, with jabs that bruised flesh and cracked ribs. Rededya seemed to eat Mstislav's blows, grabbing the rival prince and smashing him against the ground like a rag doll. But Mstislav never stopped. Minutes turned into hours as the soldiers watched their leaders tear into each other like wild bears. Grappling, breaking, striking, they seemed to endure beyond the limits of human pain, of human ferocity, but they still kept on fighting. Still, as Mstislav began to tire and feel the pain of his injuries, Rededya still had strength to spare. If it went on like this, it would only ever end one way, with Rededya smashing Mstislav's skull against the ground like a coconut. The only way for Mstislav to turn the tide would be to break one of his culture's most sacred rules, the honor of the agreed-upon duel. While some details of the telling change depending on the allegiances of the teller, many agree that Mstislav unsheathed a concealed dagger, knocked Rededya to the ground, and dealt him a mortal blow somewhere on his torso. The Kassogian forces were mortified, and with the violation of the deal, it seemed that all-out war might break out. However, a massacre was prevented by an unexpected party: Rededya himself. With his death, he hoped that the bloodshed between their two peoples would be over. Mstislav credited the grace of the Virgin Mary with his victory, and would later build a church on the site of the battle. Mstislav would also seize Rededya's widow and his two children as captives, and later baptize them as Christians. The epic bash na bash would echo for 1,000 years into Rus culture even today. And something similar can be said by one of the most badass fights from one of Scotland's most badass monarchs. Number 6. One of the most significant moments of warfare in the history of Scotland was the Battle of Bannockburn. Robert the Bruce, King of Scots and a freedom fighter for his people, faced off against the forces of King Edward II of England. The direction of this battle would decide the entire direction of the Scottish War of Independence. It would also just so happen to contain one of the most brutal and violent moments of single combat in all of history. Sir Henry de Bohun was one of the thousands of troops who took to the battlefield that day, a member of the vanguard for the English heavy cavalry, with a huge mount and a long, deadly lance. As the nephew of the Earl of Hereford, he was every bit the quintessential knight in shining armor. This was to be his first major battle, and where he hoped he'd be starting his storied career as a warrior. What better start to a story like that than the killing of an enemy king? It was early on in the Battle of Bannockburn that Sir Henry caught King Robert in his sights, mounted on a small palfrey horse with minimal armor and nothing but an axe in his hand, a sitting duck. Sir Henry charged towards King Robert, intent on spearing him with his lance and ending the War of Independence right there and then. But King Robert saw him coming, and he wasn't going to go down without a fight. After all, Robert had more than just his duties as a king to consider in this battle. His family was at stake, with his wife, daughters, and sister being held in captivity. He needed to win this battle if he wanted the leverage to force England to free them, and he wasn't about to let Sir Henry take that from him. The two charged towards one another in the middle of the battlefield as the soldiers on both sides watched in awe. Sir Henry aimed his lance straight and true, his plate armor gleaming in the sunlight. But shiny armor doesn't win fights. Raw skill does. As Sir Henry approached, King Robert performed a perfectly executed dodge, letting the lance pass harmlessly by him. Sir Henry's momentum kept carrying him forward, unable to change course now, exactly as planned. King Robert stood up in his stirrups, rising to a shocking height, raising his axe and then bringing it down in a fluid, decisive motion. The axe's business edge smashed through Sir Henry's helmet, shattered his skull, cleaved through his brain, and split his head in half like a cantaloupe. King Robert hit Sir Henry with such force that the handle on his axe snapped, and Sir Henry collapsed from the back of his horse onto the grass in a bloody heap. Witnessing this, the Scots erupted into euphoric cheers, knowing their king was a true warrior, leading them to victory. The English, who'd seen Sir Henry as a rising star in the cavalry, were horrified and demoralized. They would retreat the next day, resulting in a decisive Scottish victory. What did King Robert the Bruce say about the whole thing? He was sad to have ruined the handle of his favorite axe. And when it came to putting young upstarts in their place, that place being their grave, there was only one man who could equal Robert the Bruce. Number 5. What kind of person do you need to be for the deadliest samurai of all time to refer to you as the strongest swordsman that he ever faced? You'd need to be the master of the swallow sword style. A noble man who could be a surgeon with his prized family katana, Sasaki Kojirō was thought to be the only swordsman who could put down the wild beast that was Miyamoto Musashi. Musashi was a veteran with combat in his blood. He'd killed an established samurai at 13 years old without even using a sword. He defeated the man with his raw strength and size before smashing in his skull with a piece of wood. In the decades since, he'd been a wandering wild man, drifting through Japan after coming of age in the major large-scale battles of the era. He'd sought out strong samurai to test his skills, beating them and humiliating them with his strange and unconventional style. Sometimes he beat whole dojos of trainee samurai at once, just to prove his superiority. He lived only for the thrill of fighting and killing, and legend said that he rarely, if ever, bathed. He'd approach you in a dirty robe, greasy hair tied up, dark eyes sparkling with malice, and challenge you to what would inevitably be the last duel of your life. And that was exactly what happened in 1612, when he'd heard the rumors of Sasaki Kojirō's expertly cultivated swallow counter, a fencing technique that he'd formulated by copying the motion of a swallow's tail. Musashi thought he could be an interesting opponent, so he petitioned the local lord for the chance to duel Sasaki. When he was granted permission, the scene was set for one of the most famous samurai duels in history. But nobody but Musashi himself could have possibly predicted how this legendary battle between two master swordsmen would unfold. The fight was set for 8 a.m. the next day at a small island near Ogura. Sasaki, respecting his opponent, rode there with his entourage and the officials who would judge the fight hours earlier. They waited, and 8 a.m. came, but Musashi was nowhere to be seen. Sasaki felt insulted, but perhaps also a little relieved. Maybe Musashi had chickened out, fearing that Sasaki would be the one who'd end his illustrious and bloody career. But no, Musashi was actually just asleep when they found him. They brought him a bowl of water to wash himself with, and he just drank it, before groggily stumbling down to the boat. On the way to the island, he didn't seem to have a care in the world. He used a paper string to tie back the sleeves of his kimono, and used a knife to carve a sharp edge onto one of the spare oars. The boatman must have thought that Musashi had lost his mind, but he knew exactly what he was doing. When the boat reached the shore, the famous demon of the sword seemingly awoke inside him. He leaped off the boat and ran toward Sasaki before the officials even had time to chastise him for his tardiness. Sasaki unsheathed his blade, confused as to why his opponent was armed only with an oar, and Musashi bellowed, "You'll have no more use of that." It's true in many martial arts that the warrior who strikes first is often the one who loses. He gives too much of himself away, gives his opponent the ultimate advantage, information. In the sheer panic of the chaotic scene, Sasaki was baited into striking first, bringing his sword downwards in what should have been a killing blow. But with an easy motion, Musashi deflected Sasaki's sword with the oar and channeled all of his energy into a single, decisive counter-strike. The sharp edge of the oar found Sasaki's skull and split it, killing him instantly. As the pioneer of the swallow counter collapsed to the ground in front of the stunned officials, Musashi gave a simple bow and left. To the untrained eye, it would have seemed like a decisive kill, but Musashi would later describe Sasaki as one of the finest opponents that he'd ever faced. Kind words for a man whose skull you split in half with an oar. It's one thing when two professional killers go up against one another. It's another thing entirely when it's just two normal men who've been pushed to their absolute limits. Number 4. It wouldn't be a video about epic one-on-one battles in history without a good old-fashioned all-American shootout. A fine example of this is what unfolded in Savannah, Georgia back in 1832, when bad blood between two locals boiled over into spilled blood. Philip Minnis wasn't always a violent man. In fact, he was a medical doctor and the heir of an old Savannah family. He was also Jewish, which became a point of frustration for another local named James Jones Stark, a member of the Georgia State Legislature. For months, it was widely reported that Stark was making vicious anti-Semitic remarks about Minnis behind his back, though, funnily enough, Stark wouldn't ever dare say it when in Minnis's direct presence. He always had excuses and apologies to offer then. However, the very fact that he may or may not have offered an apology became a point of focus for Stark. He publicly denied ever having actually apologized to Minnis for any of the awful things he'd said about them. This would backfire on Stark when Minnis wrote him a letter in July of 1832, demanding satisfaction in the form of a duel. In the broad sense, a duel was agreed upon, but the two disagreeable Savannans and their seconds, the men who agreed to assist them in the duel, couldn't settle on the details. Stark and his second, Thomas Wayne, wanted the two to take each other on with rifles, but Minnis and his second, Charles Spaulding, claimed that Minnis's rifle was still being repaired at the time. However, Stark didn't take this for an answer. He and Wayne went to the dueling place alone, fired their rifle in the air, and declared the duel won. They spread rumors about Minnis giving up on the duel because he was a coward. Naturally, Minnis wasn't very pleased when he heard about all this. The tensions between the two continued to boil over until they had their ultimate confrontation at the barroom of the City Hotel on August 10th. There, Minnis accused Stark of being a coward for the way he conducted himself with the duel. Some say that Stark reached for a weapon at this point. Others say that what Minnis did was unprovoked beyond Stark's cruel words on top of months of belittling and harassment. But what we know for sure is that Minnis drew his own weapon and fired a shot through Stark's chest, killing him instantly. Minnis would be put on trial for murder, but the jury would swing in his favor, returning a verdict of not guilty. Stark's ghost has become a fixture of local Savannah folklore and is said to haunt the City Hotel to this day. But when it comes to the place where folklore and fact meet, nothing holds a candle to the sheer insanity of our next epic 1v1 battle. Number 3. It's one of the most contentious events in Thai history. Two rival sovereigns faced off against one another on the backs of elephants, unquestionably one of the most badass concepts in human history. No two historians seem to agree on the exact details. There was one crazy incident where a historian was threatened with criminal charges for questioning these details, but the legend has grown so much bigger than any minor detail. It was one of Crown Prince Mingyi Swa of Burma's lifelong ambitions to successfully invade and conquer Siam, modern-day Thailand. He staged 5 failed invasions between 1584 and 1593. It would be the last of these 5 invasions that would give Mingyi Swa an eternal place in Thai popular mythology when he would meet with King Naresuan of Siam in the middle of the battlefield. One account said that King Naresuan strode forth on the back of an elephant, bellowing a challenge to his opposite among the Burmese. "Whatever is our royal older brother doing standing in the shade of a tree? Come forth and let us fight an elephant duel for the honor of our kingdoms." That's one of those offers that you just really can't refuse. Whether or not an elephant duel between the two was ever formally declared, multiple accounts corroborate the two rulers storming directly towards each other on their elephant mounts, ready to battle to the death. Like a medieval joust on steroids, the two charged in. The most popular of all the accounts claimed that Mingyi struck first, hitting Naresuan's helmet, but the blow glanced off. Mingyi wouldn't be so lucky. Using his battle scythe, Naresuan cut deep into Mingyi, mortally wounding him. He bled until he slumped back onto his elephant, a royal corpse. A fitting end for a legacy of failure. There's no myth element at all to our next case of bizarre single combat. We know for a fact that it's 100% real and 100% insane. Number 2. Gaston de Fer vs. René Ribière. Once, a fight erupted between 2 French politicians that would soon lead to bloodshed. The combatants were Gaston de Fer and René Ribière, and were known for having explosive arguments over matters of politics. Things boiled over when de Fer said, "Shut up, idiot!" towards the end of one of their famous spats, and that was just a bridge too far. Ribière, despite the fact that he was imminently about to be married, challenged de Fer to a duel in order to get his honor back. The weapon would be the épée, the longest fencing sword available. De Fer promised that he would wound Ribière in such a way that it would ruin his wedding night. Their political colleagues didn't dissuade them from taking this conflict-heavy approach to conflict resolution. In fact, another politician, Jean de Lipkowski, was the one who officiated the duel. Luckily for both men, the duel wasn't to the death, just to satisfaction. Both men would later die of old age in their 70s. You might be wondering, what makes this a particularly epic and memorable duel? The key here is the timing. It happened in 1967. That's right, 2 French politicians had an honest-to-God épée duel in the late 60s and drew blood in the process, while the Beatles were releasing records and the Vietnam War raged. Say what you will about France, there's no denying that they keep the old traditions alive with a certain dramatic flair. Number 1. In a vast and complicated history of brutal one-on-one duels, few people were as accomplished as the 7th President of the United States, Andrew Jackson. Some accounts say that he may have fought as many as 100 duels in his lifetime, many of which are violent and insane. The truth is, he was only actually in a handful of official duels, but he was ready to throw hands and weapons informally for pretty much anything. In 1806, he attacked Virginia attorney Thomas Swan and beat the living hell out of him. A few months later, he engaged in a duel with Charles Dickinson, a professional marksman who was widely feared for his dueling ability. Dickinson shot him first, but Jackson survived and shot Dickinson dead a moment later. He would live with Dickinson's bullet still in his body for the rest of his life, a souvenir of his uncanny ability to cheat death in even the most improbable circumstances. Why did he get into this deadly duel with Charles Dickinson? First, they got at each other's throats for a failed repayment on a bad horse bet, but Dickinson took it too far by insulting Jackson's wife Rachel, who was very dear to him. Jackson was famous for his ill temper and his quickness to jump to violence when he felt insulted, as many people would find out the hard way. The year after, he chased down a fellow land speculator in the streets after an argument, pulled out his cane, which contained a concealed sword, and stabbed him with it. The speculator survived, and they would later go on to do business together. You really couldn't hold being stabbed in the street against someone in those days. It was unprofessional. Jackson's biographer would later say, Jackson's propensity toward violence was a lifelong characteristic, born partly out of his cultural ancestry, partly out of his personality, and partly out of his childhood in the Waxhaws. The expectations of these southern gentry accentuated this tendency. Jackson used violence during these years to establish his reputation as an honorable gentleman. And if that's true, this has undeniably been a video full of extremely honorable gentlemen.